All right, AP Hug, we are going to finish off what remains here of part two. Try to move through this at a fairly decent clip, but not too fast to where you don't know what's really going on or that sort of thing. All right, so we finished off with B down there talking about feedlots, kind of something we also saw on the Food Nation video, and just this whole kind of system that is used now in a lot of the other livestock farms. Um, Beef industry kind of used the example here, but it's used similarly. Uh, Pork, sheep, chickens, all that sort of thing for again putting on a lot of weight really fast to get these animals ready for market. Okay, so where we're going to go to next is going to be a couple of categories here. We've already mentioned commercial agriculture, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into it, and then something related to that, agribusiness. Okay, and so first of all, we want to make sure that when we've talked about this, and this is kind of the easy part, getting started here, is just that anytime we talk about and you see use of that word commercial agriculture, is that it's about making money. It's business. Okay, it is farming, whether it's crops or animals, livestock. It is all being done to make money. Okay, and so yep, for profit, and they run it like a business. The whole old-fashioned notion about kind of life down on the farm, that sort of thing. No. This is big business, and you even heard that kind of echoed with some of the people that were some of the farmers that were interviewed in Food Nation, who said they don't really consider themselves farmers even. That their role is more like kind of they see themselves almost like managers. Um, so what agribusiness is a form of commercial agriculture, and so it talks about vertical integration. And whenever we're dealing with anything that connects in, let me get some business here, other stuff up here for you. I'm going to go with A, and then I'm also going to drop in. Let me do this. There we go. B. So let me talk about this vertical integration concept. This is when a business, to maximize profits, goes well beyond just owning an interest or capital in the business itself. What we see with agribusinesses is, sure, you're going to have like a corporation that owns the farm, but then they're also going to own like a trucking firm that is going to then take the product of that farm, whether it's transporting livestock, whether it's transporting harvested crops, but they own the trucking firm that's going to take them and that product from the farm and then head it off to either a manufacturing, or excuse me, processing center, or a warehouse where things are going to be processed so that they can be ready for for market, to go into grocery stores and that sort of thing. And a lot of times they'll even own the processing centers. Okay, and then they'll have business connections and sometimes own the wholesalers that take it from the processing centers and get it prepared to then be distributed and sent off to the different grocery stores that it's going to be sold in. When we talk about vertical integration, you've got one business that owns and operates all of those different little pieces, parts of that. And by doing so, they're not having to, when we talk about horizontal integration, that's usually when you have a business that is still doing all of that, but working with a whole bunch of other businesses. With vertical integration, you're going to have this big, like I said, like a big corporation, and they're going to own all of these different facets of it. And by doing that, it reduces the overall cost, and that increases the profits that they're going to make. Okay, so yeah, they have control over everything from the raising of that livestock or those crops, and pretty much all the way up to when it is delivered to a store. That's kind of the place where usually things, whether it ends up going to a Fred Meyer or Safeway or Target or Walmart, that's where it kind of ends up going into the hands of another business. But every step along the way until there, the agribusiness has their hands in it, and they control and own most parts of it. Okay, because that takes a lot of money, a lot of capital to operate. Be there. Most agribusinesses do tend to be transnationals. We see them operating in multiple continents, different regions, and they're big business. Okay, that is a lot of money to be made at that kind of form of agriculture. All right. Another example that we can look at is what we call large scale farming. And this is another one of those types of agriculture that we have seen grow with the move towards more and more globalization here in the later part of the 20th century and going into the 21st century. Keep going on this one. Why am I getting some clicky problems here? There we go. So a supply chain approach, okay? It's taken care of in kind of, if you squint, you can kind of see the little food supply chain there. But they're taking kind of a version of what agribusiness does there. Supply chain means that usually that business is going to maybe own some parts of that, from farm to processing to retail. They may also use separate businesses that they work with to accomplish some of those. But all of that is the idea of creating this supply chain, and that is how we get a product from its origins, where it is, grown, where it is produced, all the way to where we purchase it in a store. Okay. Monoculture, which is something that we're typically going to see large-scale farming, and also see in some versions of agribusiness. And monoculture is kind of what the word implies. Sometimes you also hear it referred to as monocropping, and that is where you are growing only one crop. Okay, and that is just to maximize profits, to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to kind of going through the process of raising different kinds of crops in different ways, and there might be different times where one crop is ready to harvest versus the other. They might need varying levels of water in terms of irrigation and things like that. If you are focused on monoculture, you just get very, very, very good at raising that one crop, and usually can maximize your yields. Downside to monoculture is that when you have issues with either pests or maybe plant diseases, they can really wreak havoc in a monoculture kind of environment, because they're going to zero in on that one kind of crop that you're growing, and if you don't have a ready way of combating it, it can destroy a crop very, very quickly. Okay, but on the flip side, if you can keep control of those things, and again, we learned a little bit about this on the Food Nation video, there is a lot of money to be made. All right, and one of the results that we see in this is what's called suitcase farming. This is what more and more the modern farm is starting to look like, and that is that it's like a place of work. Okay, it's a place where people punch in, on the clock and put in a shift and go home at night. And some of these are farms that, you might have like some security people who keep an eye on it at night to make sure that things are secure. But the old-fashioned notion of, the farmer and his family, living on the farm, and, and they're just, boom, they're there. That is more and more going away when we look at agribusiness, when we look at large-scale farming. The people who work the farm, it's like a 9-to-5 job, or something similar to that. During harvesting time, those are usually they're gonna work longer hours or work multiple shifts, that sort of thing. But that's a definite element of large scale farming, which is an element of agribusiness. Okay, is what we call this suitcase farming. All right. Let's see, moving on to commodity chains and consumption. All right, let's get a little bit on this. This is where we, again, are looking at agriculture in terms of really, really big business. And again, transnationals, where we're looking at farming, which is now turned into this, this globalized economic element of it. Again, think back to what you saw in the video, and they're talking about just these, these transportation hubs and networks, and these chains that go from the farms to to big cities within a country, but then even going beyond the country, and foods that are being imported and exported. A lot of the fruits and vegetables that we see, particularly fruits, come from outside of the United States. If you ever stop to take a look and see where, bananas and pineapple and things like that are coming from. Yeah, some of them come from Hawaii, but still making a long trip. But a lot of them are coming from, Central American countries, some of them South American countries, some of them, coming from Mexico, that kind of a thing. Okay. Let's see here. There we go. And yes, far, far from place of origins. And what they call cool chains, it's kind of like the little image shows there, is that to transport those kinds of goods, like I was just talking about fruit, and some of the other kinds of crops. Some of the expense required in doing that has to do with the fact that you have to have vehicles, whether it is trucks and the trailers that they use, whether it's trains and the box cars that they use, but they have to have cooling systems in them so that the produce doesn't spoil. And so when we have that, where you're having to make use of those technologies to artificially cool down your mode of transportation, that's where we get that concept of cool chains. All right. Region interdependence. There we go. All right. So you get a little bit of a breakdown right here, and again, this gets into kind of the give and take in the relationships that we see around the world. We've talked about this in terms of just some of the other transfer and connections and exchange that we see, and this happens with agriculture as well. And so we've seen with globalization, we've seen the world shrink down when it comes to the world of agriculture, just as much as anything else, technology, culture, all those other things, and we definitely are seeing like I'm just telling you that what we see, some of those foods in our market are coming from parts of the Western Hemisphere that aren't always as developed as we might be here in the United States. And as we have moved on into the 21st century, we've seen this trend where that has become something that's happening more and more and more frequently. Okay, that there's going to be certain types of foods that developed countries like the United States are going to lean on the developing countries or less developed countries to supply us with. And so that's, a lot of times that's where a lot of that agribusiness is sometimes is even going beyond borders. That's where we talk about the transnational. And some of the agribusinesses, they operate farms in different countries. They operate agricultural businesses in different countries. And that's part of their supply chain that they then use to get those things eventually to market. All right. You got there. And the image there just kind of gives you a very, very simplified view of some of the food chain that goes on around the globe. And, it has become something that we have seen the world become more and more interconnected with. One of the issues with the war between Russia and Ukraine is the Ukraine produces mass amounts of wheat. And there's been strong concerns about the disruption of that wheat coming from Ukraine, not only impacting parts of Europe, but even going down into Southwest Asia, Middle East, and down into Africa. There's concerns that the ripple effect from the fact that Ukraine can't produce a normal wheat crop right now because they're in a war is having these ramifications that go way, way beyond Ukraine. And then every once in a while you'll hear stories on the news about where there's been maybe bad weather that's impacted the coffee crop. Whether it's down in South America and Colombia, or maybe it's in Africa, and just the prediction that coffee prices will go up. Impacts the cocoa crop and cocoa beans, and pretty soon you hear the price of chocolate will be going up, and that is all evidence of the way that we are now interconnected globally when it comes to kind of reliance and interreliance and interdependence on food supplies. Okay, and so there's the good side of it. A lot of the things that we think of as those luxury crops, which are I mentioned coffee, I mentioned cocoa, tea is considered a luxury crop, bananas, pineapples. These are all things that high demand and a lot of times not readily able to be grown just anywhere, and because they can be, because of the demand, they can charge a little bit more for them. I know most of us here in America, we think, what, coffee, and $3-4 a cup, not a big deal. But again, it's kind of evidence of how spoiled we are as Americans, because in other parts of the world, that's what they make maybe in a day, is that much. And so um, that ends up being part of this global economy and this interdependence as well. The countries that are the producers of those luxury crops, they depend on the demand that comes from, a lot of times, the developed countries, for those crops, and ends up making up a good part of their economy, which is why it's so disastrous when either there's a change in weather patterns, or maybe some kind of a natural disaster that impacts one of those crops, or maybe a drought kind of situation comes up where they're having trouble. Anything that impacts the health of those crops being able to be harvested and then processed for those luxury goods, it's going to have major impacts on the economies of those countries. All right. Let's see, moving on. Connections to neocolonialism. So we talk about neocolonialism, the new colonialism, all right? And, we were talking about imperialism and colonialism in our last unit. There is that kind of that relationship. And again, we kind of look back to Africa because, Africa is a big supplier of coffee beans. Get the right one there. Kenyan coffee, Nigerian coffee. The high demand for these things, and there are concerns sometimes that some of the businesses that are operating, the coffee industry in those countries, kind of that whole neo-colonialism idea, where they start to get some influence in the country itself. We've seen some of this down in Central and Central America too, where American Fruit Company, Dole, places like that, who back earlier, maybe about 100 years ago or so, had real major influence. They're running these big plantations to grow these crops, and they hire locals to work in them, but they're American-owned businesses at the end of the day. And a lot of the fruit that are being grown through those plantations are then sent to be sold in the United States. And in the meanwhile, the American companies that are operating in those countries have a lot of influence over their governments. They can kind of make demands. They can ask special favors because they're a big employer and they're a big part of the economy. And that's a good thing for those countries that have, these transnationals operating in them in an agricultural sense. But there's also a dark side to that, because again, when they start asking for favors, when they ask for regulations to be, suspended or ended so that they can operate their farms, their agricultural businesses a certain way, that's getting into issues of sovereignty. That's getting into those issues of influence that, not always, the way that a country wants to operate, when they're feeling where they have to bend to an outside force. Otherwise, they could suffer economically if they don't. Right? That's what we're talking about with all that neo-colonialism. Fair trade movement. This has been something that's been kind of a backlash to that neo-colonialism. And you'll see every once in a while, I think there's a couple of them. I remember down in Cannon Beach, there's kind of a fair trade store down there. I think there's one up in Seaside. And these are stores that make an effort to stock goods that come, a lot of times they're like handicraft, whether it's, handmade clothing, whether it's, jewelry, things like this, where it's being made by, people from the land of its origin. A lot of times the fair trade movement tries to focus in on helping, indigenous people of a lot of developed, less developed or developing countries. And they make an effort to try to sell it in these stores at a fair market value. Okay. So that the people who are working on the end of producing this stuff are raising crops, like fair trade cocoa there, to try to get them a better living wage. So that, it's not this idea of people who are just working, like we talked about with offshoring of jobs and things like that. The fair trade movement is trying to push back on that, and so if you look at the little image there, it talks about the fair trade movement tries to make sure no child labor, people are getting fairly paid for their work, and that sort of thing. And so you'll see stores sometimes will use fair trade stickers on certain items, and you have some stores that just advertise themselves, little shops that advertise themselves as fair trade stores. Okay, one of those things that some place like Trader Joe's and some of the more kind of fancier organic markets. I'm trying to think. Whole Foods sometimes has a more of a tendency to try to carry more fair trade goods. I know in my neighborhood we have New Seasons. They're spendy. You spend more, you pay more to get things, but it's the idea that that the money you're spending is helping someone who's on the end of producing, the food or the goods that you have in your hands that you're buying. All right, that is what that fair trade movement is. And then we can take a look here at the role of government and the idea of subsidies when it comes to agriculture. And I should back that up. Role of government with agriculture. Okay, this subsidies is can sometimes be kind of a controversial area. This is where the government steps in to help farmers. Okay, we see this in the United States. We see it in many countries that a good portion of their economy relies on agriculture. And, because farming is such a challenging and difficult profession, I guess we're going to call it that, a lot of times farmers are right on the edge economically. And we heard them talking about on that video. I mean, you can have one or two bad growing seasons. You can have a pest show up that, you're struggling to try to get rid of. And you can see a crop destroyed. And if that happens, maybe one season, you might be able to weather it. 2 seasons, you're going to be looking at bankruptcy. And so that's where the U.S. government will step in, and other governments do the same thing to help farmers out. Okay. And some of that economic aid that they give them or what we call subsidies. And it's basically, it's kind of like an assistance program. And it's also the way that the government kind of makes sure that supply and demand stays at an even keel. There'll be times when, because of supply and demand, the government will buy certain foodstuffs from farmers, in some cases almost to destroy it. There's stories about milk that has been dumped because they don't want to flood the market with it. That'll bring the price down too low, and then that also will cut into the profitability of farmers. And so sometimes the government pays farmers not to use their land on a certain year, or not to produce as much of their product, whether it's crops, whether it's livestock. And they'll pay them to back down on that just to keep supply and demand in an even keel so that prices are stable. Okay, so subsidies, again, they're talking about there $53 billion in government subsidies in 2020 here in the United States. Right? I'll be honest with you. I don't know if that was, that's pandemic time. And so I don't know if that is a bigger number than usual, a smaller number than usual. But that is an example of the kind of help. And we talk about on that little image there, where it talks about bailouts. Again, that's the government stepping in, a farm that is on the verge of failing, going out of business. That's the government saying, hey, we're going to either give you a really like low interest loan that you have a long time to pay it off, or we're just going to give you a gift of money just to save your business. All right. So we'll have governments here in the U.S. and in many other countries that actively help to make sure that farmers can stay in business and keep doing their thing. Okay. The other role of government is going to come in helping to build infrastructure, making sure that there's railways and highways that connect the farms to processing centers and eventually to retail marketplaces. That the energy sources will be there for farms to be able to use, and government gets very much involved in the whole kind of battle for water. Government has to have some sense of control as to where water is coming from. One of the issues with California here recently is, for many years they have in effect have bought water rights from some of their neighboring states because California hasn't been able to come up with enough of their own water to take care of all of their needs for all of the farming that they have in their state. That takes the role of government getting in the middle of that and doing the negotiating, and literally you're buying rights from another state to make use of reservoirs and and lakes that are used for water sources like that. And it definitely takes a strong role from government to get involved in all of that too. All right. Okay, I think yes, that gets us to where we need to be. So the last part we'll be covering, part 3, and it's the biggest part. All right, I will warn you in advance. I think we are looking at probably, I would imagine, about 10 to 15 slides of information. And so this is where we get. I'm not going to say we haven't, hell, we haven't covered anything yet, but this really gets into some really, really detailed and gets into some theory about not as much agriculture, although we'll still be talking about agriculture, but now we make this shift into, like it says there, rural land use. So rural territory out there, where we got that folk culture going, for making a connection back to Unit 3, that kind of thing. All right, so we'll probably start some of this in class, but my guess is before we finish up with this unit, there'll be a little bit more video coming your way. Okay, all right, till I see you in class. Bye.